Good day, everyone, and welcome to the PTSD Buddies podcast. I'm your host, Jamie McWhorter. PTSD Buddies is a nonprofit organization that helps people dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD Buddies provides online support through Facebook groups, and we currently have thousands of members all over the world. This podcast is dedicated to those members of PTSD Buddies, and these are their stories. On this episode of the PTSD Buddies podcast, I talked to Debbie from Newfoundland. Now, Debbie takes us on an incredible journey. Debbie doesn't even remember a time where she doesn't have PTSD. It all started when she was very young. It all started from her father, and it led from a bad father to bad relationships, bad decisions. But she has taken all of her stories and put it into a book that she's about to release. Now, this book is pretty big. She even talks about getting death threats from people over the release of this book. So she tells us everything that's going on with the book, with her story, with her PTSD. She tells us all in this episode of the PTSD Buddies podcast. I hope you do enjoy. Good day, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the PTSD Buddies podcast. I'm here with another special guest, Debbie. Debbie, how is it going today?
I wish I could say today was a really good day because I've had a lot of good days lately, but I've had some unfortunate instances which have been very traumatic in the past few days. So today is a little bit rough, but
Really?
I'm going to get through it.
In the past few days, you've had some trauma.
I have.
Well, before I get into the questions, is that something you wanted to talk about?
Sure, I have no problem talking about that. I've been doing quite well, actually feeling pretty good. I have just finished completing my autobiography. It's called A Recipe for Complex PTSD and PNES. And for those who may not know, PNES is psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. So I was doing pretty good. And obviously, you know, when you write your autobiography, you talk about people who cause those problems for you, the people who in my life that caused the trauma. I chose to change their names, but I've done some publicity of my book, and that's what we do when we write a book. Some of the people that are named in the book, I don't use their names, I don't use their real names, but they found out about it and weren't very happy. So during the weekend, I actually received a phone call, and it was death threats.
Are you kidding?
So it was very traumatic.
I guess so.
Sorry?
I said, I guess it was traumatic. Wow.
Very, very. It set me back. I expected some fallout from writing my autobiography. I did. I thought maybe someone will send me a letter and say, you know, I'm going to sue you because you talked about whatever. But I did not expect the death threats. And this is from a family member whom my family has disowned me, by the way.
Oh.
I haven't spoken to them in over 6 years.
Wow.
It's the third time in my life of being disowned. But this was a family member who decided that they weren't very happy about me. So it was death threats. And I hope it's okay. Is it okay to say what was said to me?
Whatever you want to say.
Okay. There was a lot of derogatory comments and, you know, putting me down, for instance, saying, you're only writing the book to cause trouble. You're just writing the book because you want to make money, which is the furthest thing from the truth. And then it's, I want to kill you. I want to strangle you. I heard you were going to do a book launch on the Eastport Peninsula, which is where I'm from.
Yep.
And if you show up there, I will come and you will be sorry. I'm going to show up in your driveway and frighten you. I want to shoot you. I'm going to kill you. So
holy moly.
It's been rough, really rough. And one thing that I'm really proud of, I have to say, because when you've had trauma, as I have had throughout my whole life, there's anger that creeps in there sometimes, you know, and in years gone by, when someone would be attacking me like that, I would lash back. But, you know, I had the phone on speaker. My husband listened to it and I listened to it, and I did not lash back. And for years, I've tried to kill my ego, you know,
Yeah.
try to be a civilized and peaceful person. And that's one thing that came out of it that I'm really proud of. So the police became involved, and I hope it won't materialize, and I hope it's the end of it. However, for me, it was very triggering because I grew up with a narcissist father, and you know, the demeaning, the degrading, the threats, the intimidation. I lived with that all my life. So listening to that phone call the weekend brought it all back to me. So I don't feel well. My body it's like I went to bed and I was able to go to sleep, but I wake up and it's as if I didn't rest at all. And my body feels like it's coming apart inside. And I know that feeling. It scares me because I have felt much better. But I'm hoping to get through this. And I think I will. I will.
Well, I can't think of many bigger triggers that you just gone through. I mean, these are death threats, right?
Yeah.
I mean, holy moly,
Yeah.
people threatening to come to your driveway, and I mean, I'm a I'm a husband myself, so I can imagine this is pretty stressful for your husband as well.
It is very stressful for him. It really is. You know, I mean, having complex PTSD and the seizures that I have, it's hard on the family. But you know, when that sort of thing happens, it makes it very stressful. But I am so grateful that I have the support around me that I do, because I don't know if I'd be here, Jamie, if I didn't have the support that I have. Because you know, the other night after this all happened, and I was here, my husband goes to bed before me, and I had to take Ativan. I just was just really, really anxious, and I had to take Ativan. And you know, I looked at that bottle of pills, and I've been there. I've been suicidal, and I looked at that bottle of pills, and it's not that I was going to take them. It's just the thought was there. But you know, I have so much. I have no biological family, as I said. They've all disowned me because I've spoke up and told the truth. But I have so many wonderful people around me. It's like I feel like they've wrapped me in this cozy blanket of love, and that's what's getting me through.
Well, you don't have to be blood to be family.
That you better believe it. Right
Yeah,
on.
and that's good. And I agree 100%. Having a good support system around you is key to dealing with PTSD, to dealing with depression. You know, I mean,
Yes.
100%. And I'm really happy that you got that.
Oh, I have it. And where I've written my autobiography, I've done some promotion of it. I have a Facebook page for my autobiography. And the people that have, you know, it's overwhelming. People from all over the world who have written me and, you know, thanked me for speaking up, because, you know, what I'm talking about is something that's, it's not common. A lot of people aren't aware. Complex PTSD, you know, comes from a lifetime of abuse. And from a child right on up, my brain didn't get to develop the way that it was supposed to. And I ended up with, you know, I worked for a long time as a counselor, but I ended up disabled and unable to work because of the complex PTSD. And then I started having seizures, they're psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. And that also comes from all the trauma that I've endured. And what really I want people to understand, and I guess one of the main reasons I wrote my book is that I want people to understand that both of these illnesses are totally preventable. Had I grown up in a loving, I did have love. There was a grandmother who loved me unconditionally.
Right.
But if I had grown up in a normal, if there is such a thing as normal environment, I would not have had what I have to deal with today. Those illnesses could have been prevented.
So sounds like you've been dealing with this for a very long time.
I think when I look back throughout my life, you know, even when I was a little girl, there was two instances where I think it was seizures back then. Like, I'm 62 years old, so you know that was in probably the 60s, and I passed out, and at one point I fell over a cliff, and I had to have all these EEGs done. They called them convulsions. But when I look back to my childhood and you know, the stress that I was under from birth right on up, I think that there was stuff going on then. And I remember as a teenager, I would hyperventilate. I had no idea what that was. And so I think, as I look back and now that I understand my illness, I think that it was with me throughout my life. It's just that I kept pushing it down until 2012 when I could no longer push it down. It just exploded and I just couldn't, I couldn't work anymore. That's it. I just had to give it all up and try to heal.
Was there a certain moment that, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for you?
Yeah, I worked as a counselor and I worked 25 years as a counselor. And I also did a lot of, education, training, things like that, like stress management programs and anger management programs and things like that. I would come at home at the end of the day for at least 2 years, and I would sit on the bed with my husband and I would cry and I would say, how can I get through this next day?
Yeah.
And I pushed and for 2 years, each year I had a month off work. It's just like I collapsed. I couldn't do it.
Yep.
But I made myself go back to work again. But this particular day in 2012, I was driving to work. I had gone home for lunch and I was driving back to work in my truck. And I was thinking, my body, my physical body, there was so much anxiety and there was so much, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't think. I was falling to pieces. I felt like I was coming out of my skin and I wanted to drive my truck over the road. I wanted to die. And as I was driving down the highway to work, I was thinking, how can I get out of this? I don't want to live. But I couldn't drive my truck. I couldn't do it. I couldn't drive my truck over the road. So I went to work and I went in the office and, to the most beautiful ladies in the world who work with me, I just collapsed into the fetal position and said, I just can't do this anymore. And that was my last day of working. It was in February of 2012 and I never went back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So was there workplace trauma going on?
There was workplace trauma.
Oh,
I won't disclose where I worked.
Of course.
And in my autobiography, it doesn't say where I work, but I worked there for 25 years. And the first part of my employment was like, I felt like it was my calling to help people. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thrived. It was amazing. But then suddenly, near the end of it, there was new management that came who had different ideas, who harassed me, who belittled me, I'll just give you an example. I remember one new management person that came on the scene and came into my office and looked at all my certificates on the wall and wanted me to prove that I was capable of being a counselor. And this person said, you're not a social worker. No, I'm not a social worker. I was trained specifically to be an employee assistance program professional. And
Right.
I had many designations behind my name. And I was, Canadian certified counselor, for example. But I had to prove myself. And there was procedures which I followed, like, my work was always confidential, and people that I dealt with, I have so many stories in my head, they're just thousands. But there was new procedures brought in place where I was supposed to disclose things, and I just couldn't. So it was, there was a lot of harassment in the end of it. And I think I may have gone over the edge before that, but I think it's what kind of tipped the edge for me.
Wow. So you've been dealing with trauma, with bullies your whole life.
Oh, yes, I have. I definitely have. Yeah.
Can you remember a time before PTSD, before all the bullies? Was there a time of being normal?
No.
No?
No. The only time I can remember being normal, Jamie, is I lived in Labrador and I lived there for 40 years. I married my teenage sweetheart,
Oh, nice.
who is a recovering alcoholic. So that was a nightmare. Normally, we have the best relationship I could ever imagine now.
Good.
But, it was very, very traumatic to marry him and live that way. the only time that I can remember not having trauma, except this past weekend, is we left Labrador because I needed to get out of there, and we moved on the west coast of Newfoundland. But we're about 45 minutes from Deer Lake. We built a log home. It's up on a mountain. It overlooks the ocean. I'm surrounded by nature, and it's my healing place. And that is when I started feeling peace. I started getting well. I do something called TRE, and I don't know if many people are familiar with it, but it's trauma release exercises. And after I started having my seizures, the PNES, psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, I started really getting into doing trauma release exercises and started to heal myself. So up until last weekend, I was doing pretty darn good. I'm going to get back there too. I'm pretty stubborn.
I bet you will. Well, you've been dealing with PTSD for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years of dealing with it, have you learned any tips?
Tips to help me?
Yeah, like what works for you? If you're triggered and you're having an anxiety attack, what ways do you calm down, or what's a grounding technique you use?
Well, I have a service dog. I am blessed to have a service dog. Her name is Lily, and she's a little Havanese. And she's the most amazing little dog. I had a seizure on the weekend after that phone call. And Lily miraculously will get in my arms and lick me, and my seizure will stop. So she's very comforting. In addition to Lily, my comforting dog, who is amazing, I do the trauma release exercises, and I encourage anybody. It would be better if you work with a practitioner, ideally, but you can go online and find out how to do the exercises yourself if you're interested in it. But I work tirelessly with TRE. I do that on a regular basis, and trauma release exercises helps to release the stress response that's up in your central nervous system. So I find that extremely helpful. Having, like we talked about a little while ago, having a support system. I've been here in the wee hours of the morning and having flashbacks and anxiety and panic attacks, and knowing that there's someone, and for me, there's always someone that I can call any time of the day or night, and knowing that I can do that really, really helps. Yeah.
You said panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember your first?
I do remember my first, Jamie. And I remember when I wrote about this in the book. My biological family, when I think it was 12, we moved from Newfoundland to Ontario.
Okay.
And I was rebelling as a typical child that age does after they've been abused. So I was rebelling, and my family decided that I was bad. They didn't want me, and they put me in the custody of Children's Aid Society in Ontario. Oh. And as I look back and understand my life now, I understand what was going on. I was angry. I was hurt. I didn't know what I wanted. I was confused. I was trying to find a place. I ended up in many foster homes, but it just didn't work out. So I ended up at one point in what they called a receiving home before I went to a group home. And I was, in my mind, I was a good kid. I didn't want to be acting out, but I was trying to find a place to fit. Yeah. And there was children coming and going into that receiving home. Some were older, some were younger, some were there. They were all there for different reasons. But I quickly learned that in order to fit in, I had to join the ones that were acting out. Otherwise, I was going to be picked on. So there was a little bit of a kerfuffle at supper time one evening, and some of the older kids started acting out and fighting and cursing and stuff like that. So I was involved, and I was taken and put in a padded room. There was no window. The walls and the ceiling and the floors and the door and everything was all padded, so you couldn't see out. And I was locked in there. It was the first time I remember having a panic attack. It was not very nice. And I remember when I wrote the book, I started having a panic attack. I wouldn't say a panic attack, but I started having anxiety when I was writing it. And I think, writing it was therapeutic. I had to call my daughter about that one, and she's amazing. She's got me through so much. So we had a little chat, and I had a little cry and got mad and all the things I needed to do to release it. And I also contacted Children's Aid Society and realized that thank God they don't use those rooms anymore. So, but that's the first one I had. And also, I'll just tell you something that still blows my mind. There was a lot of sexual abuse when I lived in Ontario, and I ran away and I lived on the streets. And we lived in London, Ontario, and one of the places that I lived, there was a girl in the group home at one of the places that I lived, and we both ran away. We hitchhiked from London, Ontario to Montreal, Quebec. There was a lot of sexual abuse there, and there was a very serious incident where 3 men were in a car, and I'm not going to get into the traumatic details of what happened to us, but one can only imagine. So we sought out the police, obviously. We wanted to, get them, I guess.
Yes.
And at that age, then I would have been 13, I think. They put us in jail. I still, Jamie, I still can't believe it. I spent that night in a jail cell. There was, and I mean, no wonder I have panic attacks. I don't recall having a panic attack while I was in that jail cell that night, but obviously we were listed as runaways. So the Montreal police put us on the plane the next day and sent us back to Ontario, right? But the treatment was, it was brutal.
Sounds brutal.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine. How old were you when you were thrown in a padded room?
I would have been 12 then.
12 years old. So you were.
Yeah.
So you're just dropped off at this place,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up thrown in a padded room. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It was, and for years and years and years, Jamie, I could not sleep. I had to sleep with the lights on.
Yeah.
I couldn't sleep with the door closed. I didn't sleep. I just didn't sleep. It was brutal. My whole life was brutal until I think I was about 50. And my husband, who is a recovering alcoholic, and he's sober, he said to me, Deb, why don't you get something first so you can sleep? You got to do it. And I said, no, I don't want to get hooked on pills or anything. Anyway, right. I just had to give in and get something to help me sleep because it was horrible.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I imagine some dreams must have followed with this sleep.
Oh, nightmares.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nightmares. Yeah.
I can only imagine. My goodness. You've been through so much, Debbie.
Yeah, and that I've always, all my life, I would tell people because I've always talked openly about it, and people would say you should write a book, and I always used to say I'm going to write a book, and I 3 attempts, but this time I've got the book written, I've always felt that it's my calling to help people. I guess that's why I was a counselor for 25 years, but then it was taken away from me, and I couldn't work. But I just feel that I now have a calling to help people in another way. So I'm hoping that by telling my story of abuse, that it will, people failed me as a child. I was in the care of Children's Aid Society in Ontario, and I was sent back with my family to Newfoundland. They decided to move back, and I was sent back with them. And, there was no follow-up whatsoever with social workers in Newfoundland. And I remember coming back, and I was probably about 13, 14 then. And I remember one incident after we moved back to Newfoundland from Ontario. And I'll just tell this little story. It's in my book as well. It was in the summer, and my biological parents, I don't call them mom and dad anymore because they don't deserve those names. They were able to drop a friend of mine and myself off to a hangout, where teenagers hung out. And when we were there, I won't name her, I'll call her Ruby, okay? She's called Ruby in my book.
Ruby, okay.
Ruby, I'll call her Ruby. Ruby had her hair in rollers. And, being 13, 14 years old, I said to her, I said, duck down. I don't want anybody to see you with your hair in rollers. I was a little bit embarrassed because I was a teenager, and I thought no more than that about it.
Right.
Anyway, we had our evening at the hangout, and I rarely brought friends home because I never knew when things were going to erupt in violence, because there was alcoholism and just a lot of violence. And I rarely brought anybody home, but this particular day I did bring this girl home with me, a friend. Her name is Linda. She's in my book, and she knows that I'm talking about her. She's okay with that. And Linda came to visit me, and as soon as we got in the house, I took my shoes off in the porch. She still had hers on, and we'll call him Jim because that's what I called him in the book. Jim came raging through the door with a hammer, and he came after me with the hammer, and he was spitting, I don't know what he was spitting, bullets at me and yelling and cursing, and he was coming after me with the hammer because of what I had said about Ruby having her hair in rollers. So Linda lived up the road, down a hill, up over another hill, and it was all gravel road at that time. And we both ran, and we ran out the front door, and we ran to the safety of her family. Her family wanted to keep me, and I so badly wanted to stay with them. I was scared. I was terrified. But, Jim, I called people different names in my book, so I'm a little confused. Bear with me. Jim, who's my biological father, had called the RCMP, and they basically said, if you don't send her back home, you're going to be charged with kidnapping, I guess, or something. It would have been child abduction. Right. So I had no choice but to go back home.
Holy, my God, Debbie.
But, I remember at that time, and I would have probably turned about 14 then, and I remember at that time looking in the phone book, and I had to get out of there. It was so traumatic to live in that house, in that environment, and there was nothing. I couldn't find anything, and even as a child, I was a resourceful person, but there was no help and there was no follow-up. So I was failed. The system failed me. And I look at the system today, and, being a counselor for all those years and dealing with families, it's so sad to see that we still need so much work, because the children today, if you see a child today and a social worker, and I don't mean to pick on social workers, don't get me wrong, because they're just doing their job the best they can with what they have.
Right.
But, if you see a child who has bruises and cuts, you'll take them out. But if you see a child who has the emotional abuse, like I endured, it's not taken seriously, and there's so much damage being done to children today, and I want to get that message out there so badly that we have to start protecting our children, because this mental illness that I've ended up with, it's preventable. It's preventable.
Yeah, and I find it can really affect the child too. And it lasts with the child all the way into adulthood.
Exactly. And like that phone call that I told you that I got, this weekend, that brought me right back to my childhood, even now, and I'm 62 years old, but it brought me back to the abuse of my childhood. And, there's so many triggers that you wouldn't even think would be a trigger that trigger me to have a seizure or to have anxiety or to have flashbacks, and it just follows you the rest of your life.
It does.
Yeah.
Debbie, these are incredible stories that you're sharing with us from your book. Tell our listeners again where we can find your book.
My book won't be published until June, so it's in the final stages. If someone wanted to follow me, if they looked at Debbie A. Sampson, so that's DEBBIEA SAMSON, so Debbie A. Sampson on Facebook. They can follow my autobiography page there, and I'll make announcements all the time and let people know. But it's going to be released in June. I will be going to Labrador City because that's where I lived for 40 years. So I'll be going to Labrador City to do a book release. That will be my first, COVID permitting. And as I said, I'm from the Eastport Peninsula, so that will be my next stop, is to go to the Eastport Peninsula to do a book release. But as far as, and I self-publish, so I'm new to all this. I'm learning as I go, but I think my book will be available on Amazon firstly, but eventually it'll be in the stores. So it's called A Recipe for Complex PTSD and PNES.
We'll include all that in the description of this episode. And Debbie, at any time, if you have any links to your book, even like when it releases, I can always come into this podcast and edit the description, so our listeners are always up to date on how they can get your book.
Excellent.
And you're telling some amazing stories. So anytime you feel you want to share a story from your book, by all means, cut me off and go.
There's so many stories. There's just so many stories.
Yep,
Yeah.
But every story you share with us is going to inspire our listeners, and there are going to be stories I know that our listeners are going to relate to.
Definitely. I guess the one thing that I hope that I can inspire people to know, that even though it's difficult to speak up, you have to speak up and tell your truth. And I can't tell, it's not easy. But writing that book has been so freeing and so therapeutic. And we don't, I know there's the Me Too movement and all those kind of movements, but we have to talk more about the sexual abuse, the child abuse. We have to talk more about it openly. And I just hope when people read that book, they'll realize. I know I remember one person who wrote me, and it's not often. PNES is something new. I don't know about new. It's been around, but it's not something that people know a lot about. And I remember one lady wrote me, and she said, "I've never ever met anybody who had complex PTSD and PNES." It goes together. So just want people to understand it. And I know when I started having the seizures, they would last anywhere from 45 minutes to 5 hours. And if anybody has seen back in the 70s, the movie The Exorcist, the only way I can describe my seizures is like the exorcism. That, I don't know if you recall that, Jamie.
I do.
Ever see? Yeah, you see that? So when I started having seizures, they were vocal, and it was me flipping and flopping all over the place. And I have to our family has a sense of humor. We have to live with this. My son he's 36, my daughter is 40, and my son lives in Labrador, and he'll phone me, and if my voice sounds a little quivery because I get shaky, when I have seizures, he'll say, "Mom, are you doing a fish flop again?" So we have to. We have to laugh about things. What can you do, right?
It's true. Laughter is a medicine.
Oh my gosh, laughter. I have what I call an unbiological sister. She's amazing. Her name is Lynn, and she lives not far away from me. And she bought me this little flag that goes on my patio, and it says, "Welcome to the loony bin." And I love loons, but it says, "Welcome to the loony bin." So we joke about, "Yeah, I'm loony. Yeah, I'm loony sometimes. That's okay, Debbie." Right? Yeah.
Debbie, over your years of dealing with all this, have you come to find any organizations out there that has been helpful?
I think one of the most helpful things back in when I first started, because I've tried to heal all my life, and when I was younger in my 20s, I started going to Al-Anon. And Al-Anon is for families of alcoholics. And I, way back then, before I, went to university and became educated and became a counselor, I didn't understand alcoholism. I didn't understand what was happening in my home. So Al-Anon was extremely helpful to me. I had also found, once I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I did see some counselors, not to knock counselors, because I am one of them,
Yep.
But they did more damage than good, because I think it's really important that you be trained specifically to deal with complex PTSD, because it is unique. So I found an amazing counselor who understands complex PTSD, and she's been with me ever since the end of 2012, thank goodness. And the support of just being able to talk to other people who know where you've been too, it makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Mm.
I know myself. PTSD doesn't come by itself. I have depression as well. I have the anxiety.
Yeah.
Do you have things on top of your C-PTSD?
Yeah, that comes along with panic attacks and flashbacks and depression and anxiety and the freaky one. I call it freaky.
Yeah.
The seizures that come with it. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a mixture of all of it, Jamie.
Yeah, and you said they can go up to 5 hours.
Yeah, when I started having them, I didn't know what they were. I had no clue. And I have the most amazing psychiatrist. I've had him since 2012 as well. He did not know what was happening to me. I ended up on the psychiatric ward in Corner Brook Hospital. They didn't know what was happening to me. Thankfully, as I said, I am resourceful. I'm a counselor. I'm educated. And I did my own research and found out and diagnosed myself. And thankfully, I have, like I said, an amazing counselor, an amazing psychiatrist, and I told them this is what's wrong with me, and they believed me, and they did their own research and learned about it, and they're helping me.
That must have been so terrifying, though. You didn't even know what was going on.
It was very terrifying, and like I said, it was just like being in the Exorcist movie. It was extremely terrifying. Very terrifying. Did not know what was going on. And I had learned, it's funny, I think that everything happens in our life for a reason, but there's this wonderful guy out there, his name is Damien. And Damien is in my book as well. And when I lived in Labrador City, Damien had been in, I think it was Afghanistan, I stand to be corrected, but Damien had learned about trauma release exercises, and he came to Labrador City because that's where he's from, and he's decided to just do a little group of, it's trauma or tension. I use the exercises for trauma. You can also we all have stress,
Yes.
The exercises just releases the stress. So I had seen, that was probably the second year after I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I had seen an advertisement for what he called trauma/tension release exercises. And I was not in any condition to meet in a group of people at that time. I wouldn't even wait outside my house. So I was brave enough to contact Damien, and God love him, he came to my house. He showed me how to do those exercises. And like I said, if you Google it, you can find out how to do the exercises. And Damien brought with him this blue gym mat. And then we left Labrador City. I've been gone 7 years, and it's probably about, I'm thinking 4 years ago that I started having the seizures. And I had some pretty bad experiences with hospitals and professionals that, basically told me that I was faking it, the seizures. One psychiatrist in St. John's kicked me out of his office, and that's in my book as well. It's a long story. But after that incident where I was kicked out of the psychiatrist's office and accused of faking it, this is not my own personal psychiatrist.
Okay.
It's another guy, and I could probably go off onto another string here. It's when I was trying to get medical marijuana. It wasn't legal at that time, but I was trying to get it. But anyway, that's another story. But on the way home from that traumatic experience with that psychiatrist, I started having a seizure in our truck, and it was just like a light bulb moment. The seizure was mimicking the tremoring that happens when you do TRE. And I thought, I wonder. Anyway, I had brought Damien's blue gym mat from Labrador City to where I live now. We have a loft over our garage, and I spent that summer in the loft in our garage doing TRE. And I shook and I screamed and I babbled things that were just primitive, is the only way I can explain it. But it was releasing the trauma from my body. That's when I started to heal from the seizures. And then around the same time, I also got my service dog. So
that sounds
oh my
draining.
gosh, I could talk forever, Jamie.
No, that's good. That sounds very draining. Those times you say in the loft or whatever.
Yeah, very draining,
Wow.
extremely draining. Oh my gosh, yes. And it's not something that I would recommend that anybody do by themselves. I've had a lot of therapy over the years, a
Yep.
lot, and I'm also a counselor. So when I started to do the TRE and all those hours and hours and hours that I spent doing it, it was extremely draining. But it's not recommended to do TRE that long.
Yep.
But I just felt like I was ready, and I wasn't scared, because there would have been a time that if my body was doing that, because it happens natural. You engage what they call the psoas muscle, which is the muscle that contains the fight, flight, freeze response. You engage that, and naturally, as humans, we're supposed to shake and release trauma, but we've conditioned our bodies not to do that. But when we engage those muscles, our nervous system kicks in and it releases naturally. So it was extremely draining. It was extremely powerful, but it was extremely healing.
That's cool that it really worked, though.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Is this something you're continuing to do?
I do it on a daily basis, and it's so interesting. My service dog, she's amazing. Every night after supper, I get a cup of tea, and I sit down in my recliner. Like, you're supposed to lie down and do the TRE, but I mean, I've done so much of it, I can just bring it on. It's just kind of close my eyes and it'll happen. So every night after supper, that's my routine. I get Lily as my service dog. I'll pick Lily up and I'll have my cup of tea. Lily will lay on my legs, and she doesn't mind me shaking, but I'm shaking naturally. It's happening naturally. But she's trained, although I didn't mean to do it, but every night after supper, if I'm not doing it, she's nudging me, and as if to say, "Come on, Debbie, it's time to do it now."
They're amazing, man. Those dogs are amazing.
Oh my gosh, she's amazing. She certainly is. Yeah, yeah.
Debbie, I got to ask this because one of our sponsors is Spartan Wellness. You mentioned medical cannabis earlier.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
something? Well, if you don't have a prescription, our sponsor, Spartan Wellness, would be happy to help you get a medical cannabis prescription if that's something you're interested in. But did you find the medical cannabis helpful?
Yes, and Jamie, when I was looking to start using medical cannabis, like I said, it was illegal at the time. It was really difficult to get someone to prescribe it. People didn't understand how the dosages worked and all that stuff. And I wish there had been Spartan Wellness at that time. But I did end up finding options, and I do have a prescription for medical cannabis, and it has made the difference, a big difference. I was able to come off a lot of my medication that I was on. I reduced it significantly. The one thing that I find the most helpful with the medical cannabis is nighttime.
Yep.
The nighttime dosage that I take, it's amazing. I have the most wonderful night's sleep, best night's sleep that I've had ever.
Yeah. Me personally, I take medical cannabis before I go to bed, and it took away my nightmares. As a veteran, it took away my nightmares. So that
awesome.
was a big thing for me.
Yes.
You've mentioned it a couple times, Debbie, about your service dog. I have some listeners who are very interested in service dogs because a lot of people out there with PTSD are interested in getting a service dog. The dog that you have, was that your dog before it became a service dog?
No, I did a lot of research because I wanted a service dog, and what I found out, and I'm not an expert at it, but what I did find out was that there was waiting lists to get a service dog that was trained to help someone with complex PTSD.
Right.
And I just could not wait. I did not want to go on a waiting list. So I called around and I talked to different people, and I found a trainer in Deer Lake who was helping me to train Lily. She's not perfect by no means yet, but she's getting there. And I just got her. I decided that I wanted to have a little dog, and for me that works much better. She doesn't shed. She's very easy to train, and so I'm training her myself, and it's working.
Amazing. That's so good to hear. Debbie, you're doing a lot of different things that seems to be working for you.
Oh my gosh. And I'll tell you one thing that's working for me. I was a very public person. I was on town council in Labrador City. I honestly thought that I would retire and end up going into politics. Like that's the type of person that I was,
Wow,
really
really, eh?
outgoing and involved. And I moved to this little place where I live, and it's on the ocean, and I'm very secluded. And my friend Lynn, that I talked about, one day we were walking on the beach, and she was picking up something, and I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I started picking up sea glass." And I said, "Huh? Sea glass? What's that?" I had no
Yeah.
clue. Anyway, that was a few years ago. So since then, her and I collect sea glass, and I was on the beach today, and it's just so therapeutic to sit on the beach and just sift through the sand and pick up sea glass. And I do sea glass art. I spend hours and hours and hours doing sea glass art, and it's so therapeutic. So if you can find something, it just keeps my mind off of things, and to be creative and to use that, it's just so therapeutic.
That seems to be a big thing for people with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
To keep their mind occupied. I've
Yes.
noticed that there are people with PTSD who don't realize they have PTSD until they maybe retire, or they have more time on their hands,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
their mind is at rest. I mean, there are people there who have PTSD, and I think don't even realize they
They
have
don't
it.
realize it. No. And I can relate to that, because until it came crashing in, I pushed it down. So I kept myself so busy, 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 busy all the time. And I was just trying to push it down, push it down, push it down, but it just overflowed. It couldn't.
Yeah,
But I can relate to that. Yeah,
yeah, you're just working and working that process and nothing.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
see, our mind is smarter than we are.
Yeah.
That's true.
Right.
Yep.
That's true. Yeah.
My mind is smarter than me, and my wife is smarter than both of us. Me and my mind. Well, Debbie, I don't have any more questions for you. So it's at this time where I want to give you the floor. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Is there anything that we didn't cover in this episode?
Oh my gosh, what didn't we cover? Jamie, I think we've covered a lot of it. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Debbie, I host group support meetings, and I can't help but say this. I usually end my group support meetings with this, and listening to you talk has been so inspiring, um, for me personally. I gotta say it, Debbie. You've been through so much over your life that I can't even express how much strength I think you hold inside. I don't think I've ever met a stronger person in my life than you. The things that you've gone through, and you are still standing. Not only are you standing, but you are writing a book. You are helping other people. Woman,
Mm.
Debbie, you are kicking the shit out of your PTSD, and I am proud to know you.
Oh, Jamie, I needed to hear that right at this moment. Thank you. You made my day.
Well, I'm
And
happy because you're amazing.
I'm a fighter. Oh, I'm a fighter.
Oh, I can tell. I can tell.
I'm a fighter. Yeah. Yeah. I just hope that the book will help others, and to know that you're not alone, to just know that you're not alone, that makes so much difference, because there's been throughout my life I felt so alone, and I just want people to know you're not alone. There's other people out there, and you can go reach out, get help.
You're
Yeah.
right. You're right.
Thanks for this, Jamie. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for doing
Mm.
it. All right, well, just stay there for 1 second because I want to say goodbye to you. But
Okay.
before you, I just want to say thanks to everyone out there who's listening to our podcast. We really appreciate it. It's people like you who are helping us get the word out about PTSD, spreading the word that it is a mental illness, and not all injuries. Hey, Debbie, you can see some injuries are invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't just affect soldiers.
Great.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in to our podcast. We'll be back again in a few weeks with a brand new one. So I hope you tune in. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this episode of PTSD Buddies podcast. I sure hope you enjoyed the show, and I sure hope you join us for the next episode of the PTSD Buddies podcast. And remember, if you or someone you know is dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, please look for PTSD Buddies on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Come join one of our groups and find your PTSD buddy today.